Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Michelle Chiba, and I have taught the FNT 102 course in the Fintech program at Seneca Polytechnic. And that FNT 102 course is all about privacy and identity management. So today's webinar, I'm so pleased to have joining me is, first of all, in the background, and many of you probably know who he is Aishan. And he's not only a professor, but he's also the program coordinator and innovator of these fireside chats. So we have a lot to thank Aishan for bringing us together today. The other person I'd like to introduce is Carlos Penteado. He is the subject matter expert, and he actually was so gracious of giving his time to several of the classes as a guest speaker in FNT 102. And, it was such an informative area, right, of knowledge that I thought, why not bring it as a fireside chat to all the FinTech students and to the broader community. So today's fireside chat, the title is Privacy by Design in FinTech, and it meets process improvement methodologies. So that is the teaser for today. And I'm going to hand it over to Carlos just for him to introduce himself briefly, and then I'll take it over with some really hard-hitting questions for our expert. And we're also looking forward to having an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. So Carlos, may I ask you to take it over and just give a brief introduction of yourself?
Of course. Thank you, Michelle. Thanks everyone for joining on this Saturday morning. So I'm really happy to be here sharing a little bit of my expertise in mostly process improvement, Lean Six Sigma. I'm pretty sure some of you have heard of it at some point in time, but maybe I'll briefly give an introduction about myself, Carlos, a little bit of my personal side, my personal preferences, and a little bit of my professional trajectory as well. So so you notice a little bit of my accent. I come originally from Brazil. I migrated to Canada approximately 8 years ago. And it's very interesting because I was able to make the transition from Brazil and its culture and working culture and everything else into Canada and still be able to do it smoothly. I think I was very privileged in terms of finding, when I landed in Canada, finding a role that was very aligned to my background experiences and my previous journeys as a process improvement professional. So speaking a little bit of that, I graduated as an industrial engineer back in 2009, long time ago. And that was pretty much my first contact with operations and quality improvement, Lean and Six Sigma and all those things. So back in the days, back in that time, I right away, right from the university, I started working with that, Lean and Six Sigma, of course, mostly concentrated in the services sector. So I've rarely touched manufacturing, which is the birthplace of most of these methodologies. But I was happy to being able to apply that knowledge I've gathered and start applying in use cases more related to banking, telco, a little bit of healthcare as well. So you see different applications happening. Then, as I said, when I moved to Canada, I was happy enough to land a role in starting with banking and then migrating a little bit into IT implementation and doing a little bit of consulting as well. And today I hold a position with BioScript Solutions, which is a healthcare provider based off New Brunswick. So they have a very, very reasonably large operation within Canada. And the idea is to provide special care for special illnesses and conditions, right? And I hold the position of Business Process Design Manager, which oversees processes in general within the company and also supports the implementation of platforms that will help digitize services within that company. So that is my professional snapshot. Now speaking a little bit about myself, as I said, I live with my family here in Canada, in the West End, very happily so, very well adjusted, and I like to explore different disciplines, not only focused only on engineering or operations. I like reading about philosophy, about sociology sometimes, things that I think will enrich the approach of process within companies, and it does happen. So if you might hear me saying a few things that are not necessarily the standard of process improvement, if you've heard of that before, it's because I do like to kind of go around and explore different areas to support my core discipline. Let's put it this way. In terms of just a little bit, sharing a little bit of my own preferences and taste, we were before the meeting or this conversation, we were discussing about Blade Runners. My favorite movie is in the background here, and I love rugby. I'm from Brazil, but that's I do like soccer, but my preference is rugby. Have always been kind of accidental in a way. And I have developed a recent taste for jujitsu, which is one of my things right now, starting with my son, my oldest son, and then seeing him training, and then I got into it. So just sharing a little bit of my background. But that's it for now. Maybe we should jump into the questions, Michelle.
Yes, thank you so much for that rich background and for sharing so much about who you are. And I think it's of value to students in fintech to see that, whatever they learn, and this is something that I talk about in my privacy class as well, that, you should try to expand your scope of learning because you never know how it's going to impact on your knowledge with respect to fintech. As you said, sociology, psychology, privacy. They're huge domains. There's such a broad range of expertise and knowledge that you can bring to a position within fintech. So thank you for actually providing that kind of a background and actual experience. So one of the things we're going to start off with today is to really say, okay, how does privacy in fintech, how does it intersect with process improvement methodologies? I mean, how do the two work together?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question, and it can be very broad, but I think the core of the response is usually around two major pillars, two things that I've noticed are very parallel between these two disciplines, right? So I'll speak a little bit of about Lean Six Sigma, of course, starting from there, and then how it transitions, I think, to privacy in fintech. So the first thing, which is what was since the birthplace of Lean and Six Sigma, the focus is always in conformity, focusing on what is the requirement that we have in our business in operation that we need to tend to and fulfill, and requirements that will basically create parameters for our operation to enact, right? And I think having that visibility is sometimes it's not an easy thing, but it's the awareness that we have customers or groups of customers or clients we tend to, and knowing their needs and requirements and capturing them and putting them into the operation is a key thing that Lean and Six Sigma have always put up front and as their almost as their DNA, right? And I think what I could identify in privacy, especially in fintechs, is that there's a lot of customer-centric approaches or steps you need to take. So the focus must be the client, the customer, and of course, the first steps is to identify these customers, what types of users we're talking about, or groups of users, their needs and requirements, and spending time in knowing those things and knowing their needs is essential to doing any other approach that will come afterwards, whatever that is, right? And I'll explore a lot of that, I think, as I go by with the questions, and I think it's going to be highly valuable, and I'll get into more details here and there. But that's one first point. The second point is Lean and Six Sigma have always favored prevention over remediation, right? And that's I noticed speaking with Michelle, I noticed there's a lot of that, especially if you're talking about privacy by design and knowing that one breach might be way too much to handle. It's already too much to for the operation and for the customer. It's already a big impact. Knowing that and knowing that Lean Six Sigma favors prevention over remediation, and there are tools for that, is I see the second parallel being solidifying that thing. So just to give you an example, there's a tool in Lean Six Sigma that we use. It's called Pokayoki. Pardon my Japanese articulation, but that's a word that basically refers to prevention of fault, like preventing that an error or mistake happens, right? And there are major examples, especially if you're talking about manual work in manufacturing, but you do see the mentality of preventing mistakes with certain actions before the bigger mistakes happen in the end, right? So those are the two parallels that I see between privacy and Lean Six Sigma at first.
What an excellent, helpful explanation, plain language explanation, because often it's not hard.
Yeah.
Um, I think I really like that term, pokiyoki. I'm going to have to look that up because you're right. That's the essence of privacy by design. And this is the fundamental framework that's really taught in the FNT 102 course. It's all about, understanding that in the fintech world, we're dealing with highly sensitive personal information, financial information. And the idea here is you don't want to break that trust that has taken so long to engender in one's own fintech solution because one breach, one accident, one unauthorized, use or whatever, it's going to break that trust, right? And it's good.
Yes.
And there's so much competition in this area that they're going to go to the competitors, right? No
Exactly.
different.
If can
Yeah.
I expand a little bit more? Since you
Yeah.
mentioned poker, it's a very interesting approach, and of course, it came with the idea of avoiding mistakes in manufacturing. But there's different applications. One that I see very easily is that back in the days, I think WhatsApp, if you use WhatsApp, they had a button that if you were navigating a certain way, you click right away and you make a call by accident by someone. Now what they created to avoid that faulty action is they created like a two-step button. If you click on it, you need to confirm you're actually trying to make a call. That's just one example. I've seen it happen even in military. So if you're um, piloting a helicopter in military, for example, there are buttons you shouldn't hit by mistake. So you should take maybe two actions before you actually create that effect you want, like shooting missiles and stuff like that. So those are principles that you can carry over for different areas in your life or even work.
What a great example. Thank you. Now we're going to go on to another question here because we know that fintech is all about digital transformation of current, banking services. It's really positioning, for remote online, transactions, right? That's the whole value of fintech. So, when you think of it, what are some of the benefits that Lean Six Sigma and the Poke Yoki that you talked about and some of your
Mhm,
tools that you have your knowledge about? What are some of those benefits that could, it could bring these frameworks
mhm,
to digital transformation projects such as, fintech projects? And, are those frameworks that were done way back, as you said, for manufacturing, but are they
mhm.
still relevant and how do they perform with respect to kind of a fast-paced, agile uh,
Yeah.
fintech sort of approach, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's a great question. That's also a very broad theme, and then happy to discuss further if needed. So, but basically, I think the question becomes whether Lean Six Sigma or continuous improvement have an application or has an application in digital transformation projects or engagements, right? And my answer to this have always been based on observations, readings, and of course my personal experience as in different roles that I held. So the answer for me is yes. And the thing about Lean Six Sigma and the perception that it has with digital transformation is that sometimes they create a little bit of a tension, right? So one favors speed, delivery. Let's create, let's build, let's test, and then let's see what happens. And as we move on, things are fixed honed or improved, enhanced. Lean Six Sigma being from a different generation favors parsimony, calmness, taking their time to discover, to probe, to finding out, to speaking, talking to people, mapping the process, understanding steps, what are points of contention, where are points of where things can fail. And that goes a little bit of against the other one, which we just spoke, like, which is speed, right? So taking time versus speed, that's essentially the clash. But I do see a lot of the benefits that Lean Six Sigma has in terms of discovery, taking its time, and as I said, and repeatedly will say so, finding out what the process is, the foundation behind what the technology is trying to help, right? So I think that is most of the times overlooked or even skipped sometimes. And the problem with that is that you're going to see negative effects down the road. You're going to try to, oh, I didn't know a process would, there's a step here that happens. I didn't know that, so I didn't create any features to tackle that, or I didn't know that certain kind of geography was able to access my system or my process. So if you the unknowns become a hindrance at the end if you don't do foundational work, right? So that is the first part of the response. I would say creating foundational work and having the tools to explore and discover what is the process, what is the problem that the process is facing, what are the groups of users, requirements, and all those things. The second thing, which is very much aligned to that, is that Lean specifically, from between Lean and Six Sigma, Lean focuses on wastes. So we all seen versions of, or even the list of types of wastes. And I think today there are majorly eight types of waste that Lean tackles. And the benefit of knowing those is that you have something to look out for. So knowing that you have waiting, you have overproduction, overprocessing, or you have oh my God, it's failing me. But there are eight types, and they're very classic types of waste that you can see. Okay, now normally I see these cases. Let me look up in my process and see where I can eliminate, subtract, or even reduce or eliminate it, right? And then what you find is a better version of the process. I'll speak in a little bit more detail further on, but what you find is a better version of the process, a leaner version, a version that creates a response in less time, possibly, with less defects, with less rework, and all those things. So that's another portion. The other one is the approach that Lean Six Sigma takes in exploring things at the beginning also happens throughout the journey, right? So we usually refer the skeleton of Lean Six Sigma is DMAKE. You probably heard of that before: define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Which usually, if you're really being strict about it, takes 6 to 8 months. Sometimes we don't have the privilege to wait that long. But what it does is following that logical steps and getting to a point where you're probably between I and C, improvement and control, you brainstorm what are possible solutions for your problem. But because you've scrutinized so much your process and inquired so much and acquired so much response, the solutions are kind of automatic in terms of, now I validated my problem, then I know the next step is almost like a logical step to find solutions. And there's testing you can do, and Lean Six Sigma helps a lot with that, having options of solutions and testing which one is more effective. The fourth one will be having Lean Six Sigma as a toolkit. We don't have to necessarily engage in hard, strict timelines. I'd need to do Lean Six Sigma formally before ahead of time, before doing any digital engagement. You don't have to do that. Sometimes there's no time for that, and that's very, very likely. So what you can do is just explore the toolkit as you go to your shelf. Lean Six Sigma is there, so you want to use FMEA, failure mode and effect analysis, or you want to use a control chart to monitor the threat level in your system, or you want to use value stream mapping to look at the waste in terms of how the value flow in your process. There's a myriad of things you can look at, and then that is another benefit. You can use and put them back as you go, right? That is, I was trying to be short on my answer.
No,
Another
that's
comment I have is that is my interpretation. Of course, I always highlight that because there are folks in my area that would see this as they're more purists. So they will state that you need to do Lean in Six Sigma, you need to do demake. But the reality is the generation we're in, the part in life in things are so speedy and quick that it's really hard to have that privilege of holding things uh, with so much time allotted to them, right? You know.
I totally agree. And I think the key here is um, the fact that Lean Six Sigma and these methodologies and toolkits that you talk about, very similar to what we're talking about with respect to privacy by design. These are important frameworks, right? They're systematic approaches to ensuring that what eventually gets put out as a product to the public complies with laws, complies as you noted with the requirements set out by for the product, that it does, it meets what the vision of the product was, right? Instead of sort of issuing a product that, let's take a doll that only has one leg, right?
Exactly, yeah.
You don't want that. So then in terms of those frameworks and the way that we talk about, for example, the privacy framework, which is all preventative. It's a very new way of looking at privacy. This Lean Six Sigma, which is overlaid on top of that. These
Mhm,
are important frameworks. Again, systematic, but excellent um, checklists, right? As you're doing this very speedy release. The
mhm.
other thing that I think with frameworks, as we always acknowledge, they're dynamic. It's all about, it's not like a one time, oh, Lean Six Sigma, we're done. Privacy by design, we're done. We did it. Check it off. No, because of the dynamic nature of the service offering to the public, a fintech service, right? There's going to be continuous improvement, and these frameworks enable one to keep track of these. What did we
Exactly.
do
Yeah.
before? What do we still need to do? Keep applying the framework to say, what are the gaps as we continue? We're always upgrading technologies. There's always a new version, there's always an update. And even more so now because of cybersecurity, right? The
Mhm.
threats. So
Yeah.
these frameworks help to systematize that kind of review instead of just guessing. Right?
Yeah, and that's another like beautiful thing about Lean and Six Sigma. And then you're completely right. The models they evolve as the needs evolve, right? So it's never a static thing. You never do one time and then you're done. I completely agree with that. And then the continuous improvement, which is go hands in hand with Lean and Six Sigma, favors that. Like you are always evaluating your process, and that you can put in perspective two models and say, oh, is privacy by design still effective for me? And then you can compare that with possibly a new model that will come up, and then you can track those things. You can use control charts, or you can use hypothesis testing, or you can do design of experiments. You can do a bunch of things to say, is it still worth for me to invest in this model and keep using them, right?
And the other piece, which I'm sure it's a good segue into the next question, is that, you know, when we think of Lean Six Sigma, we even think of privacy by design. Everybody thinks, oh my gosh, you're right, so slow. But one of the ways you talked about the toolkits and sort of selecting which ones, I can tell you that likely there's some sort of similarities because what privacy by design is doing now is saying, let's look at least try to identify what are the higher risks, right? And if we're really in this quick sort of release agile environment, let's identify what the high risks are, deal with those, move on, monitor the medium and low risks, and deal with
Hmm.
those along the way. But at least you launch your product right away, right?
I see.
And at least you've launched your product with those higher risks minimized, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it goes into then what the next question is, right?
Hmm.
Um, and this question is, more focused on privacy. But, do you have sort of, or can you provide a kind of a use case about, with respect to the privacy process and Lean Six Sigma, what you're talking about, these methodologies specific to a fintech? right?
Yes. So what I'll do, I'll just quickly share my screen. I won't take too long, but I think it's worth sharing. Just so when we start talking about the application, like an actual application use case of Lean Six Sigma for a privacy related case, right? So to be kind of a redundant, I and then we start discussing this, right, Michelle, at the
Mm,
beginning. And one of the things that came up was this case here, if I can share it quickly.
mm,
And so this case is an actual case that Michelle and I study and said, how would Lean Six Sigma efficiently approach this problem, right? And then the problem itself, I'll try to summarize as much as possible. It's basically a prospective customer, not a yet a customer, who goes into a portal portal on in the internet, trying to open an account with a banking institution. And while they're doing this process of account opening, while not being a customer, they are required to input some certain information in the platform. And as they go, they input the information. And one of the steps, one of the responses they get is that, okay, now that you've inputted this information, these are the terms and conditions for you to open the account. And then by reading those terms and conditions, the person does not agree with that and then decides to decline proceeding with the process, right? So basically rejecting to continue with the account opening. And but at the same time, the person notices that they shared information, that they were personal information before actually becoming a client. And then they file a complaint with the OPC, which is one of the, Michelle, you're much more equipped to
the
explain who they are,
regulator. Yeah.
the regulator within this process that then certain actions are taken, which are not very relevant right now. But the idea is that, okay, we have a privacy process or a model, and then unfortunately allow certain things to happen that were not necessarily um, shouldn't been allowed to happen, right? And then on the right side here, hopefully, is everyone seeing, like, is my screen visible just to check?
Hmm.
Okay, so just on the right side here, you see like certain colorful boxes, but the reason is that these is a very basic approach to tackling these problems, right? So you would start basically with visualizing the process or points of tension. I would just quickly give you a snapshot. So this will be uh, very high level, 10,000-foot level vision of your process. And what is actually happening is that the client, or sorry, I should say prospective client, is sharing information before actually becoming a customer, which is could be not could be, it really is a point of tension, and that creates the effect of the complaint, right? That will be the first step, to look at the process, look at the inputs, outputs, and SIPOC, which is an acronym, would give you that vision very quickly. So the second thing is, and is mostly overlooked, state the problem you're trying to solve. This is, I think, is one of my pet peeves with Lean and Six Sigma, is going to solutioning before knowing the problem. And then sometimes people have glances and ideas and fragments of what the problem is, and sometimes they do not communicate with each other. Oh, this person understands the problem is the problem is the design of the website, or the other person understands that is the number of clicks that the person has to do. So that common understanding and compromise gives you a universal understanding what the problem is. That's the second big step, I would say. The next one would be selecting a metric and start measuring. So I'll just quickly show one of the quality gurus back in the days. So Deming was one of the big folks in terms of quality. And he would say, you can manage what you don't measure. I think we all heard versions of that, but basically what he's saying, if you don't have a metric, you don't know what your current performance is, and you don't know what the future is going to look like because you don't have base of comparison. So that is another big step. The other one is also very important, which is testing the process for stability. If your process improvement, what we say is that if your process is not stable, and I'll explain a little bit what stability is, you shouldn't do any changes to it, because what you're going to do is overcorrecting or creating more problems on top of what you already have. So quickly explaining what stability is if you apply a control chart into the metrics you've chosen, and you start looking certain behaviors in your metric, so you see here the highlighted part here, I'll try to zoom in a little bit. You see there's a certain behavior here that you might want to go and study, because there's likely a special cause, that's what we call, something very unusual that is happening with your process that you should take care of before doing anything else. Okay. The next step would be, now that you've stabilized your process, stabilize your process, what you do is there a better model, or is there a model, in this case, privacy by design? Can you help me versus what I have today? And this is the solutioning part, right? That's why we have the purple here. And what it basically does is compare privacy by design versus the current privacy model, which might be none, which might be just the way things are, or there might be another one. And what it does is comparing with the given metric, comparing two states of the process. So just quickly, again, just go to one slide here. So this is me trying to summarize what would happen, right? So maybe you collect 20,000 transactions were observed. And before, let's say there was something around 500 breaches detected. I don't know, that number is just a ballpark, is just to say, okay, this is my current state. And I have a breach ratio that's a made up metric, but it's still kind of putting the two together, 26 breaches per every 1,000 transaction. Now, if I apply privacy by design, do I get any better? And if yes, is it statistically better? And hypothesis testing will tell you that. So you have two scenarios, you compare, you conclude that in this case, for example, privacy by design makes the breach ratio be 8 in 1,000, and that's statistically significant. And then you are actually being more secure, more safe within your process. This is my long response to saying, we have this use case. This is just a way that Lean and Six Sigma can be applied into getting to applying a solution, a digital solution, in this case in privacy. Hopefully I wasn't too far down.
No, this is an excellent illustration. It's a practical illustration. And, we know this was an actual complaint to the Federal Privacy Commissioner's Office, and it was with respect to a fintech situation. And it's always good for students and others in the profession to learn from others' mistakes, right? That's what we
Of
want
course,
to
yeah.
do. And not only that, as I said in the very beginning, what we want to do again, and that's why these two frameworks or models um, work very well together, because they reinforce preventing the breach from happening or the problem from happening in the first place. We know that we can't prevent all breaches, but to reduce or mitigate that risk is very important. Now,
Exactly.
what's interesting is, and I might be throwing out a slight curve on you, Carlos,
That's okay.
but when I think about all of these statistics, right? And I recall when you were a guest speaker, we sort of said, hey, a lot of the students aren't very good at statistics, or they might not like numbers. I mean, I can tell you, I blur over when I start to see collection of numbers and how to analyze them. So, and this is something for the students to think about as well. Can artificial intelligence, machine learning help with this kind of analysis of the
That
stuff?
is, yeah, that is a great question. I think so. I think what AI would give in this sense, I think it's more about speed, and it's more about reading these things. So when we're talking about collecting samples, for example, right? This takes time, and then you need to wait for things to happen in order to say, okay, I past month I was able to collect 5,000 transactions, and I'll analyze those things. And then what AI do, I think, just kind of a coupling it with this approach would be to say, okay, I have a much faster reading of these things rather than just kind of a going, fetching a database, reading all those data points, charting them, and things like that. I think it would be beneficial to include those things and make it more real time, a real time reading of samples. And that's my perspective. I have a very narrow understanding of AI, But I think when we come to manual labor intensive work,
Mm,
I think that's where they would help, right?
so
And
true.
in this case, I think it was much aligned very much so with sampling and calculating and maybe providing the best hypothesis testing for you, because there's
Right.
different hypothesis tests you can apply depending on your data, depending on which statistical parameter you're trying to test for. It gets a little more technical
Yes.
statistically. It gets technical if you go down this road, but it's part of the work, right? And maybe AI can provide you with the feedback. Maybe you should use
Right.
t-tests, or maybe you should use proportion tests. Who knows, right? So
Right.
that's my take on it.
Oh, thank you very much. And well done. You're
Pass.
good. All right.
Yeah.
Um, Now let's go into another question. And you talked about, tools, right? Like a toolkit.
Yeah.
And what I'm wondering is, let's sort of shift back to sort of what that fundamental foundational understanding of these process improvement methodologies might be. So could you kind of give us an overview of the types of tools that might be utilized within this process improvement methodology framework?
Yes, for sure. And then as the easy answer for that is starting with an analogy. Of course, every tool, uh, would you compare a hammer versus a drill? Will of course depend on the scenario you're trying to use the tool, right? So it doesn't make any sense to kind of blindly trying to compare the two, because they have different objectives. So it's the same thing. So sorry, I was going through my notes here. It's the same thing with Lean and Six Sigma, right? So every stage of what you're trying to do requires a tool, requires maybe you have different options of the tool that do the same thing. And the beauty of that is not being stiff or strict about it, but more so being wise and evaluating what's your need. That's basically what I'm trying to say. So when you and I can give examples in different stages of process improvement work, right? So my one of my favorites when I start looking at this privacy by design effect into the operation, right, into the design of the system. And I'll again share my screen to just maybe quickly make it easier to highlight what the tool that I'm talking about. Sorry, I apologize, just kind of going. So I'll talk a little bit about this one, right? So I did speak about control charts a little bit, and I think that's one of the most effective tools in terms of allowing prevention, because prevention is a big thing, of course, as we already know. And what control charts do is they monitor the behavior of the process. And there are circumstances that you would like to be flagged and say, okay, now let me investigate what's going on here. And then waiting for breaches to happen might be too late. So you're maybe favoring leading metrics, right? Such as threat level or suspicious attempts or whatever you call them. You can use these metrics and insert in a chart. And you're saying, so I expect that my process will behave within this parameter. So you see like this dotted lines here, back up and down. They're natural spread of the process. So what I'm basically saying with the top line here and the bottom one is saying, I expect my process to behave within those boundaries. There are more special causes within the boundaries, but I'll just stick to one to ease the understanding. So if my process go beyond this threshold, then it's usually cost effective to go and pursue and fix the special cause than just kind of shrug it off and wait for something to happen in the end. It's more costly to fix after. So it's easier to just go after and see. So I actually put some examples here. So is it a system update happening? Is it a faulty setup or coding errors that you want to fix before you go live, or anything else that happens afterwards? So control charts is one application, and they can be applied when you're stabilizing the process, and then it can be applied once you've changed the process. Implemented privacy by design. Let me monitor now, see if there's anything happening. Another one that I really like in terms of kind of gauging the customer requirement into your process and I'll see if I can find my correct. Oh yes, right, this one. So we all seen versions of the bell curve. This is a famous Gauss curve or bell curve, and it represents a normal distribution. It's not always the case, but if you're looking at a metric in your process, uh, and you plot the distribution into a histogram, right? So frequency of occurrences versus the metric you're actually looking at. So let's say we're talking about breaches or we're talking about attempts or anything else. Is my process performing? This curve, the only let me go a little bit back. The only way to say that is by looking from the perspective of your customer. In this case, could be your regulator. It can be the regulator plus a group of customers you want to tend to. They will give you this parameter, and they'll, based on those thresholds, you see how much of your curve is within that. Of course, I'm just kind of reducing the rigor here a little bit. There's more statistic to it, but the more your curve is within those boundaries, the better user process, the better you're performing. So applying these to different stages is also very, very interesting. And that could be for a myriad of changes you're applying to your process, just to name a few. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
That's excellent. And it provides a little bit more detail uh, for the audience who may be interested in, actually implementing this. And it's going to give them more opportunity to extend their research if they need to, or, if they feel that this kind of a tool applies. So we're coming up close to sort of the end of the questions, and what we'd like to do is to ask whether, any of the audience has any questions, and I'm sure even Aishan probably has some burning questions to ask as well. So I think what we'd like to do is to open it up if possible.
Of course, happy to answer.
Folks, if you do have any questions, please put them up in the chat and I will relay them on to Michelle.
We'll give a few minutes here.
Mhm. Should I read the question, Aishan, or should I? I think Maylene had a question in the chat.
By all means, Carlos, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I'll just read out the question. I think it's easier for as a fintech student, I'm curious about the current market appetite for hiring recent graduates, especially in the context in the industry growth and transformation. With Six Sigma's focus on eliminating waste and optimizing process, how do you see this influencing hiring trends over the 6 months? Or is there anything that those trained Six Sigma a decade ago can do to catch up with evolving demands of fintech? Yeah, that's actually a very good question. And it's my answer is always evolving. My short answer is always yes, there's application, and it's worth investing. If you want to have a baseline or a solid foundation of process understanding, I think it would make you stand out more in while you're applying that knowledge in the fintech. What I do see a lot is folks that are either very process oriented, Lean Six Sigma traditional folks, maybe like myself, and folks that are more technology oriented, right? And they're kind of separated. And sometimes there's not a lot of middle ground or middle conversation. And that's the gap I've been seeing and noticing in different places all around. And I think if there's a professional that can be more versatile, the person that studied privacy, for example, has a graduation into privacy IT, and then understands the technologies or the evolving technologies and offers to process problems, but at the same time understand the foundation. I think that's a key professional to be in the market and to say, look, you're trying to implement AI into your, but do you understand what AI will do for us? And then go back and ask very, very, when I say basic questions, not because they're bad questions, but because they're the foundation. Like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Where we're going to do this, or when we're going to do this, like the 5W2H type of thing. Those are never dying, right? So those things are almost as primordial as anything related to knowledge, right? PDCA, DMake, which is the basis of Lean Six Sigma, they come from the scientific method back millennia ago. So you're studying, you're observing, you're taking notes, creating hypotheses, testing, validating, moving forward. Those things will never die because they are the basis of knowledge, right? So it's almost like a very deep conversation, but a short answer is yes. I think if you can merge the two, combine the two, I think you're standing out. Hope I answered the question.
We've got a couple more questions.
Yeah, so the next one, may I ask the difference between defect prevention and the Pokayoki approach in Lean Six Sigma and CMMI? So that's a little expanding a little bit the discussion, right? So I think CMMI is a maturity model for processes, right? And then I'm not too equipped to explain it or to speak as an expert about it, but what I do speak is about Lean Six Sigma and how it approaches defects and prevention, right? What it basically does in Lean Six Sigma is that what is found out is that preventing a defect is usually less costly than fixing a defect. So the cost of prevention or doing checkups or checklists or doing a Gemba, going and walking and see things how they're happening in the whatever the work happens versus, okay, let's just wait and see and fixing that cost. The cost of fixing later outweighs the other one. Now for maturity levels, I wouldn't know how to interpret, or I wouldn't give you a proper answer, so I don't feel comfortable doing so, but how they would see defects or prevention of defects as you move around into the models for processes. So I apologize, I'm not fully equipped to answer that one. So should I go to the next one or?
Yeah, but I was just thinking if it's a maturity model, I know that we have maturity models in privacy. I think
Yeah.
perhaps, these process frameworks, prevention, could be a measure of maturity within a maturity model. For example, if a company or an organization has a proper framework to identify, measure the processes with respect to privacy requirements, then their maturity level would be, more consistent addressing of potential risks related to a privacy breach. So their maturity would be much higher because their processes are repeatable, measurable, blah, 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 blah. So it improves the maturity level. Whereas if a company is just ad hoc, they have no processes, they have no means of measurement, then they would have very low maturity level with respect to privacy requirements. And we always talk about that baseline, and that would be the roadmap with respect to, annual reviews, whatever, with respect to their maturity. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And another aspect, as you were speaking, I think, if you're having, I believe you have a model that allows you to have a quicker response time for certain things that you identify. So, for example, you have a control chart, again, and then you start monitoring the behavior, and then you notice something is off, and then your response to that, if you're fixing that quickly, I think increases your chance to avoiding further problems or major failures that we were saying, right? And then the more mature your process is, I believe, the quicker you're responding to that.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So there's the great question. So there are more.
Yeah, good question.
They're great.
So the next one I see, what are the ethical implications of fintech companies using consumer data for personalized financial services? That is maybe a question more for you, Michelle.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
So what are the ethical implications? This has to do with fundamentally one's right to privacy. And one's right to privacy is enshrined globally in the UN privacy rights and UN rights. So there is protection there universally, and it is ethical. It's an ethical consideration. And then those ethical considerations are then translated into legal frameworks because, it's governments that enforce these ethical principles of privacy rights. So those privacy rights get enshrined into legal frameworks. Not all countries have privacy laws, but the majority of them do. And with respect to financial services, we know that it's a heavily regulated sector, similar to healthcare when it comes to personal information. Why? Because any um, unauthorized use or a breach of it will cause significant harm. So we know in the financial sector, the harm related to any breach is, and this is what the FNT 102 talks about. It's all about ID theft, right? Has a huge financial risk and harm to the individual. Similarly, in the healthcare sector, it would be the same. The notion of harm is significant. So those are the ethical considerations with respect to using consumer information when you're looking at personalized financial services. And that's why, honestly, Seneca's FinTech program is way advanced because they did include a privacy by design course within the FinTech program. So they had great insights into what students really need to know if they're going to be going into the FinTech sector.
Thank you.
So are there any? I thought there was another question. What trend?
Yeah. So there's also what trends are currently driving innovation in fintech.
Maybe that's a nice one.
Yeah.
I would absolutely answer that, but that is a very, very broad question that demands an entire webinar on its own. Carlos, I do have a question for you from my own
Yes, of
side.
course.
Now, we know that the whole business process management space, we talk about Lean, Six Sigma, all of them, the aim is try to reduce waste, try to reduce redundancies, and as Mylene has mentioned, Tim Woods, right?
Yeah.
But then the problem is fintech is predicated on innovation, and innovation requires redundancies. I mean, if you're running a very tight ship and you have no room for error, then that means you have no room for experimentation either. So it almost leads to a cognitive dissonance between management when it comes to fintech firms trying to manage innovation while sticking to business process management principles. So how can one reconcile these two?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, and I heard of it before, and I do agree that sometimes Lean and Six Sigma they create a lot of stiffness and rigor and discipline that kind of hinders creativity and all the innovation in general, as you mentioned, right? How I would approach is if you're able to compare, so let's say you have account opening process, right? And then of course, you don't want to lose the innovation, experimentation, testing, all those things. But at the same time, you want to keep an operation that is safe, that has a goal in terms of volumes of account opening per month and all those things. So sometimes there's a little bit of opposing conflicts or cognitive dissonance, as you mentioned. But how I would approach is Lean Six Sigma is very effective about experimentation, Six Sigma particularly, because it's based off in data, in quantifiable things, right? So what I would do is to keep those two ships kind of sailing is that I would keep a business as usual process here, and then whatever is open to the public as strict and disciplined as possible, keep measuring and using control charts. And on the side, what I would do is just maybe create a safe environment where you can still explore options, right? So kind of a replicating a sandbox here on the side, and you're saying, I know this is running, but I'll just play around with this and test things and see what effects I have. And you can still use Lean and Six Sigma to have the readings of what is the model you're or whatever you're pursuing maybe, So you can keep track of metrics, so you can keep track of features you're adding to, and whatever features you're adding, does it make it a change or the change I want to? So that's my basic answer in order to almost have that conflicting thing happening at the same time, so you don't lose the safety, the discipline, and you can also play around with innovation and whatever you want to include in your process. Is that like a good answer? Like
That makes absolute sense. I mean, the two-ship perspective, one focused on daily operations, wherein you apply Six Sigma and Lean to try to minimize your redundancies and wastes, but the other one where you do apply the same methodologies, but this time focusing on growth and trying to be more judicious about which measures actually work, which experimentations work, and which ones don't.
yes,
That makes
yes,
perfect sense. Super. Thank
yeah.
you.
Very much so. And I appreciate Mylene is mentioning about just kind of reading the comment here about SciPoc, DMake, Gemba, Pokayoki. All those are mouthful words, but they're principles or tools that usually stem from the Japanese principles applied to Lean mostly. So DMake is the acronym for define, measure, analyze, and improve, which is the cycle. It's almost like a PDCA, a fancy one. And then SciPoc is supplier input, process, output, and customers. As I showed for our use case for account opening, it's just a way to look at things on a broader perspective, not to be super detailed and heavy. And Gemba is, if I'm not mistaken, it means go and see. So go and see where the work happens, because I think there was an author, I forgot who he was, like it's a dangerous place to be sitting around, behind a desk. So you need to go and see, and then that exploration is mind opening, right? So it breaks your assumptions, it breaks a lot of your preconceptions about, and that's where improvement comes from that exploration. And Tim Woods is also an acronym for the 8 wastes that I refer to. Time, I'm really bad at memorizing them, but they refer to basically what we see in any work setting. You're either waiting for things, or you're over producing things, or you maybe putting more information into a form that is actually needed. Goes on and on and on. So those are, thanks for mentioning those.
Well, it just goes to show you who the expert is, because I thought Tim Woods was some other guy like a Deming. I thought
Oh,
it was some expert.
yeah, lots of names. It could
I
be.
know, but a great acronym to help
Yeah,
remember these 8 to 10 things that one has to think
yeah,
about, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, so we're coming up to the full hour. Um, Great questions. Aishan, should we keep it open just for a few minutes to see if there are any other questions, or um,
Yeah.
Carlos, if you wanted to kind of
Yeah.
add anything that
This
you
is,
thought about that you might really want to emphasize for this
yes.
section.
So if you don't mind, I'll share just one more slide.
Yep.
If we were going to leave with one message,
Yes.
I think this would be it in terms of, what if I don't do Lean Six Sigma? I don't want to do it. I don't have time. My company doesn't have time. My boss doesn't want to do it. What are the risks that I'm running into, right? And then I'll just share my screen. This is one slide, and I think this is uh, this is this is a summary of the dangers of not doing foundational work, which is brought by Lean Six Sigma, right? So first thing is, things can get worse, right? So if you don't eliminate waste, you don't reduce variability. And those are two distinct things. So you're reducing waste, so you're reducing team width, and then variability is every time you generate an output in your process, a transaction, that output versus the next, they have less variability. So you're keeping things more consistent. So if you digitize a process that is variable and uh, has lots of waste, you're seriously running into a problem of making things worse. Maybe more wastes are going to be placed. Maybe wastes are going to be now into digital. So now a form that is too extensive and I don't need all the information. If you carry that over into your platform, you're going to do the same, but now in digital. So there's a risk related to that, right? Harder to track and maintain gains. So the thing about not doing foundational work, if you don't know where you at. You don't know where you're going. That's another interesting quote. And then if you're in a place where you don't know things, but you improved it somehow because you're tracking certain metric or breaches, whatever. And then how do I replicate that? Because I don't know actually what made it improve. It could be one thing, could be a combination of things. It could be completely accidental, an external factor that played in. It's really hard to track things and replicate things. The third one is challenging resource planning, because your process is so uh, kind of all over the place, so sporadic in a way, unstable, that you don't necessarily know how it's going to behave next month. So you don't know if you're allocating resources to execute that process, if it's banking tellers, if it's even IT developers. If you don't know how it's going to behave, you don't know if you need 5 BAs or 7 BAs or 2 BAs. So you're actually doing your own portion of the waste, right? And the fourth one is something I alluded to already. It's much more expensive the closer a failure is to the customer, the more expensive it is, more costly it is to fix that. So prevention is a big deal. We talked about this, and favoring that in order to maybe not be as speedy or as delivery oriented as possible. It's a thing to consider. Do I need to create I don't know, a beta version for this application for the next month, or should I take more time in studying it and make sure like I'm fixing things before I launch anything, right? So that will be my final message. I'm happy to afterwards ask questions. Michelle and Aishan, I can provide my email, my LinkedIn, and be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Well, and of course, I've got one, just one final
Sure.
one. So when I think about, some of the tools and the systematic analysis, I wonder whether for fintech students or anyone thinking about a fintech career and going into the financial sector, right? Is there a way to use this type of analysis as part of a business case to say, hey, here are all your manual processes that you go through at the bank, right? Those non-digital legacy type activities for the purposes of an individual, you know. Here's what this new fintech solution can do, and here's the difference in terms of the error rate, in terms of the risk reduction, in terms
Yeah.
of the waste reduction. I mean, could you use it as your business case to say, hey, here's my fintech solution. I'm going to improve your overall outputs. I'm going to reduce waste. I think maybe even Malene and Rowena were kind of alluding to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think these would be great. It would be a great framework to use to do that. What do you call it? The pitch, right? Because
Sure.
you've got the evidence behind your tool, I mean, your fintech solution to say, here's where it's improving. Plus, I'm incorporating all of these regulatory requirements, KYC, privacy, blah, blah, blah. Um, and my tool even enhances monitoring and reduction of those risks, right? My tool, I'm meaning my fintech
Yeah.
solution. Yeah. So what do you
So
think?
myself, I think it's a great idea. If there's anything you can do is, I think that the secret is, you're right, like pitching the idea and then maybe proposal. Well, this is my way I can approach this problem. I'm proposing we approach this problem, and this is how we are planning on seeing if it's actually improving anything. And I think if you show in a structured way, and then that's the benefit of having this approach, you can show in a structured way how you plan on showing if something is getting improved or not. It's a great thing, and even the mindset it creates. If you're process oriented, I think it, as I said earlier, like it sends out a little bit more than just kind of a going and doing things as you develop, let's just go for coding and technology and all those things. If you have the business side, the business vision of as you're proposing, I think that's very enticing. Like that can bring a lot of value to the approach. Yeah.
Right. So Aishan, do you think that we should wrap up now
I
and
think
close
so,
off the
yes.
session? Yes. So, as we wrap up, there are a lot of thank yous. First of all, thank you, Aishan, for innovating these fireside chats. Um, very informative, very creative, and just a great session and approach to knowledge transfer. Then I'd like to, thank our subject matter expert, Carlos Penteado, um, for really illuminating us on this particular discipline um, and the value, at the current value within not just fintech, but with also the overarching privacy by design as well. And then I think, I'd like to thank the participants because they came on a
Mhm.
Thanksgiving weekend, um, and it's a beautiful day out there. But they also, clearly they provoked a lot of discussion with their excellent questions, and so I'd like to thank them as well, and really wrap up and say thank you to all.
And also, Michelle, thank you. One, for introducing us to the beacon that is Carlos. Second, for
Mhm.
hosting this session. And third, for being the absolutely amazing person that you are.
Oh,
That's
I'm
true.
blushing. I'm blushing.
Yeah, no, I'll just from my end, I cannot thank enough. This is a topic I really like speaking about. I get really excited, and there's so many things I can go on, and I appreciate everyone that came, of course, Michelle and Aishan, but everyone that came. It's not easy waking up in the Saturday morning prior to Thanksgiving, so I really appreciate you coming and all the good questions. Those questions that actually make me think more and more and kind of a hone the whole discourse and narrative. So I really appreciate those things. And yeah, it was really, really nice being here.
And happy Thanksgiving.
Likewise.
Happy
Yeah. Happy
Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you for
Yeah.
attending.
Take care.
All
Bye,
right.
everyone. See
Bye-bye.
ya.
Bye.